All right, so today we're going to deep dive into something pretty relevant and maybe a little unnerving, data colonialism.
Okay.
So you know how like in the past, countries would race to control like oil or gold or,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Right.
Well, today it's all about data.
Data's the new oil.
It is.
Right.
And it's being like mined and extracted and frankly colonized, just like those precious resources were
Interesting.
in the past. And we've got some fascinating research from Gen A to D to dig into today.
Cool.
And some pretty shocking stats actually from P-Cloud. Get this. Their research shows that 80% of personal data
Wow.
is collected and shared with third parties.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. It's a huge chunk of our digital lives. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, have you ever like stopped to think about just how much of your data is out there
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and who's profiting from it?
Yeah, well, you've hit on a really crucial point, I think.
Okay.
The comparison to like historical colonialism, it isn't just a catchy analogy. It's a way to understand the power dynamics at play here.
Okay.
Think about it, like European powers, they justified their actions under the guise of progress,
Yeah.
claiming they were like bringing civilization and development
Right.
to the colonized lands.
Uh-huh.
But what really happened?
Yeah, what did happen?
Resources were extracted, wealth was transferred, and entire populations were exploited.
Wow.
And I think we see similar patterns with data colonialism today.
Really?
Big tech companies, they offer us like free services and exciting new technologies.
Right.
But it often comes at the cost of our privacy
Yeah.
and control over our own data.
So it's like we're trading our data for convenience
Exactly.
and cool features,
Yeah.
but without really like understanding the long-term consequences.
Yeah, and just like in historical colonialism, there's a lack of transparency
Oh, sure.
and genuine consent.
Hmm.
I mean, most of us don't even realize the extent to which our data is being collected, let alone how it's being used or, who it's being shared with.
Yeah, that's a good point. This isn't just like some abstract concept, though, is it?
No.
We see this playing out like in the real world.
All the time.
That case of Getty Images suing Stability AI,
Oh, yeah.
that really caught my eye.
Absolutely. I think that case is a perfect illustration of how our digital creations, things we might even consider our own, are being exploited
Right.
without our knowledge or consent.
So what happened there?
So Stability AI, they allegedly used millions of images from Getty's collection to train their AI.
Oh, wow.
It's like they said, hey, all this digital art is just lying around free for the taking. Getty Images is calling it digital pillaging. I think that term really drives home the gravity of the situation.
It does. It definitely does. And it makes you wonder, what else is being scooped up and used
Right.
without our knowledge?
That's the unsettling reality. And it brings us to this concept of data self-sovereignty,
Okay.
which is essentially the idea that individuals, they should have the right to control their own data.
Okay, think of it like this. You have the right to decide who can enter your home.
Right.
Data self-sovereignty argues that we should have the same level of control over our digital lives.
So instead of being these like passive subjects
Yeah.
whose data is just taken and used, we become like active owners
Right.
deciding how our data is used and who benefits from it.
That's the idea.
That sounds empowering, but like, how do we get there?
Right.
I mean, we can't just wave a magic wand and suddenly control all of our data, can we?
Well, not quite, but there are steps we can take both individually and collectively
Okay.
to move towards this vision of data self-sovereignty.
Right.
Gen 8 ID. They're a leading organization in this space,
Mm-hmm.
and they've outlined 4 key principles for a fairer digital ecosystem.
Okay.
And I think they provide a great roadmap for change.
Okay. I'm all ears. What are these 4 principles?
The first principle is transparency and consent. This means that companies need to be upfront about what data they collect.
How they use it and who they share it with. And it has to be presented in a way that's clear and understandable,
Right.
not buried in some lengthy, jargon-filled privacy policy that nobody reads.
Right. Because let's be honest, those like cookie policies that pop up on every website,
Yeah.
we just click accept
You don't even think about it.
without even thinking about it. But under this principle of transparency, those policies would have to be way more user-friendly.
Precisely. And consent would have to be meaningful. It's not enough to just have a checkbox buried somewhere. Users need to be fully informed
Right.
about what they're agreeing to and have the ability to easily opt out.
So real transparency, real choice.
Yes.
That's principle number 1.
Yes.
What's next?
The second principle is ownership and control. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is all about shifting the power dynamic.
Okay.
It argues that individuals should have property rights over their data, just like they have rights over their physical possessions. Yeah. Imagine having the ability to access, modify, or even delete your data at any time.
Okay.
It's about giving users the autonomy to manage their digital footprint rather than being at the mercy of these huge corporations.
So instead of being data subjects, we become like data owners.
Exactly.
I like the sound of that. But how would this ownership thing actually work in practice? Would we all have to become like data lawyers negotiating contracts with every website we visit?
Well, that's where things get really innovative. We're starting to see the emergence of new technologies and platforms that aim to make this data ownership a reality. Think of it like a digital wallet for your data.
Okay, yeah.
You decide what information you want to store in this wallet, who you want to share it with, and even potentially monetize it.
So kind of like how we control our bank accounts.
Yeah.
But for our data.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting concept. But wouldn't this create a whole new set of challenges?
What about security, for example?
Yeah.
And who would enforce these ownership rights?
You're hitting on some really important points.
Okay.
Security is absolutely paramount. And any system that's dealing with personal data needs to have robust protections in place to prevent breaches and misuse. As for enforcement, that's where things get more complex. We're still in the early stages of this data ownership revolution.
Right.
And we need to figure out the legal and regulatory frameworks that will support it.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done.
There is.
But the potential benefits are huge.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those for a second. What's in it for us?
Okay.
The users.
Sure.
Why should we care about data ownership and these ethical practices?
Here's where it gets exciting. Imagine a world where you have control over your health data, for instance. You could choose to share it with researchers to help develop new treatments.
Or you could even sell it to pharmaceutical companies setting your own price.
Wow.
Or think about your browsing history. Instead of it being used to target you with ads that you might find annoying or irrelevant, you could choose to share it with companies in exchange for personalized product recommendations or discounts that actually benefit you.
Now you're talking. It's like we're finally getting something back for all this data we generate.
Exactly.
Instead of just being exploited. But let's be real. Not every company is going to be on board with this shift in power, right?
True.
There are some big players out there who've built their entire business models on collecting and monetizing our data.
You're absolutely right. There will definitely be resistance from companies that have profited from the current system, but I believe the tide is turning.
Really?
Consumers are becoming more aware of their data rights.
Okay.
And regulators are starting to crack down on these unethical data practices. The Gen 8 ID report specifically points to regulations like GDPR in Europe as a step in the right direction.
Okay.
It shows that change is possible.
It definitely feels like there's this growing movement towards data ownership and digital rights.
Yes.
But what can we as individuals do to accelerate this change? I mean, aside from waiting for governments and tech companies to get their act together.
Well, there's actually a lot you can do.
Okay.
First and foremost, become informed.
Okay.
Understand what data you're sharing and with whom.
Right.
Take some time to explore the privacy settings on your devices and apps
and
opt out of data tracking whenever possible. You can also make a conscious effort to support companies that are committed to ethical data practices and data transparency.
So it's about voting with our wallets and our clicks in a way.
Exactly.
Choosing to spend our time and money with companies that align with our values.
Yes.
But what about those of us who aren't particularly tech savvy? Navigating all these settings and policies can feel a bit overwhelming.
That's a valid concern. And that's why organizations like Gen 8 ID are working hard to make data ownership more accessible and user-friendly. They're developing tools that simplify data management, giving users a clear and intuitive way to control their data.
Okay.
It's like having a personal data assistant that helps you navigate this complex landscape.
That sounds really helpful. So it's not about becoming data experts ourselves. It's about having the tools and the support to manage our data effectively.
Exactly.
But let's go back to that statistic for a second. 80% of our data is already out there.
It's a lot.
It's a bit daunting, to be honest.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to reclaim our data sovereignty at this point?
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
There's no denying that.
Yeah.
But I believe it's a challenge worth taking on.
Okay.
It's not about erasing the past.
Right.
It's about shaping the future. By advocating for stronger data protection laws, supporting ethical companies, and educating ourselves and others, we can create a digital ecosystem where data is treated with respect. And users are empowered. It's a collective effort.
So it's not just about individual actions.
No.
It's about changing the norms and expectations around data.
Yes.
Both as individuals and as a society.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's a vision worth striving for. Imagine a world where your data is truly yours, where you benefit from its use, and where companies see data not as something to exploit, but as a foundation for trust and mutual benefit. That's the promise of data self-sovereignty.
It's a powerful vision for sure.
It is.
And it's inspiring to think that we as users have a role to play in bringing this vision to life.
We do.
So where do we start? What are some concrete steps listeners can take today to reclaim their data sovereignty? Yeah, it can feel overwhelming, right?
It can.
Like this massive ship has already sailed.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is that it's more about like changing course, now setting a new direction.
Exactly. We can start by becoming more conscious of our digital footprint. Take a look at the apps on your phone. Do you really need all of them accessing your location, your contacts, your microphone? Maybe not.
Probably not.
Adjusting those permissions, it's a small step, but it gives you back that sense of control.
Yeah, it's like decluttering, but for your digital life. We often hold on to physical things we don't need.
Right.
And maybe we're doing the same thing with data permissions.
Yeah, and beyond individual actions, we can support organizations that are pushing for this systemic change. Gen8ID, they're doing some fantastic work creating tools that make data ownership more user-friendly. Think of it like this. If we want people to manage their data, we need to make it easy and understandable for them.
Right. It can't be this like super technical, complicated thing that only a few people understand.
Exactly. And as more people demand this kind of control, companies will have to adapt. It's already happening.
Really?
Some businesses are building their models around data transparency and user consent, seeing it as a competitive advantage.
So it's not just about being wary of the bad guys. It's about supporting the ones who are doing it right.
Absolutely. The more we reward companies that prioritize these ethical data practices, the faster those practices become the norm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to that statistic, 80% of our data is already out there.
Yeah.
It feels like we're trying to close the barn door after the horse is bolted.
It's true. A lot of data has already been collected. But data self-sovereignty, it isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming control moving forward. It's about saying, from now on, my data is treated with respect. It's used ethically, and I benefit from its value.
That's a powerful shift in mindset.
It is.
It's not about being a victim.
Right.
It's about becoming an active participant in this data economy.
Exactly. And that's why this conversation is so important.
Yeah.
The more we talk about data self-sovereignty, the more we normalize the idea that our data has value. And we deserve to have a say in how it's used.
So to our listeners out there, we leave you with this. If you could design the ideal digital ecosystem, one where both users and companies benefit from data, what would it look like? What features would it have? What values would it be based on?
Think about it and then take action. Explore platforms like Gen8ID that are building towards this vision. Support companies that are committed to ethical data practices. And most importantly, start demanding more control over your own data.
Because this isn't just some abstract, futuristic concept.
No.
Data self-sovereignty is about shaping the digital world we want to live in.
It is.
A world where technology empowers us, not exploits us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.